Hi, I'm Rohina. I'm here with Ash, Alvin, and Jarin, and our group looked at Indian and Korean cuisine. Our understanding is that great population diversity in the GTA has led to greater diversity in food choices as well. We chose to explore Indian and Korean cuisine. We started out by dividing GTA into six regions: Mississauga, Etobicoke, Toronto, North York, Scarborough, and Markham. Then we used Yelp's algorithm to find the top 50 Indian and Korean restaurants in those regions. For our background research, we looked at sociological literature and we found that Patterson and Silver's critical mass theory is very important to our research. The critical mass hypotheses are used that art growth occurs in existing art districts. We adopted this line of thought to hypothesize that restaurants are located in areas where restaurant success has already been proven. Another piece of literature we looked at was Hotelling's law, which identifies why firms cluster together with their competitors. For our research, we observed if Indian and Korean restaurants cluster together in order to have reach to the same customer base as their competitors. We also looked at similarities and variations in the food served and the price points for both Indian and Korean restaurants compared to their competitors. We operationalized this theory through observing the maps for all regions to see where restaurants clustered, menu analysis, and price analysis for each restaurant in the Indian and Korean category. The central thesis of our research is to identify if there is a relationship between spatial distribution, food prices, and the menus of these restaurants. Therefore, the first line of inquiry seeks to address why these top 50 Indian and Korean restaurants are distributed the way they are through our menu and price analysis.
So for our code sheet, we constructed a bulk of codes intended to collect data from menus of our sample restaurants to further our arguments regarding the presence of Hotelling's law. Our aim was to develop a code sheet that allowed us to analyze restaurants in their individual spectrum and across spectrums. Thus, codes that could be applied to both restaurants and could serve as a good point of comparison and analysis were selected. Our first code that we selected was all you can eat. All you can eat versus a la carte. This is basically the type of service a restaurant offers. We then looked at tags, but in the context of our research, we determined that tags were determined as ways restaurants define themselves based on specific words used on their website. For the context of research, we chose three specific tags to look at. That is fusion, alcohol service, and delivery. For fusion, for the context of our research, fusion refers to the presence of fusion as described through the menu or on the websites themselves. We also included restaurants which serve another cuisine apart from their own cultural cuisine as fusion restaurants. Alcohol service simply refers to the presence of alcohol service or not, and delivery service simply means the presence of delivery. Lastly, looking at price point, and this was probably our most important code, we decided to establish a staple dish based on cultural discourse. And in doing so, it allowed us to compare price points, the average price point across restaurants for this staple dish. We determined three price points. The upper price point being $13 to $15, the middle price point between $10 and $12.99, and the lower price point between $5 and $9.99.
As part of the Korean restaurant analysis, they were clustered very differently from the Indian restaurants. We chose a staple dish, bibimbap, which is commonly associated with Korean restaurants, and compared it with a couple of categories including region, ratings, and fusion. For the next couple of slides, the results will demonstrate how it strongly aligns with the Hotelling's law. This is our overall spatial distribution, as you can see, clear clusters are at North York and Koreatown. First, we could examine on this map how clusters of Korean restaurants are found in Yonge and Finch in North York and Koreatown in Toronto. Since both regions are so highly clustered, this suggests a highly competitive environment. Secondly, the ratings were most commonly found at 4 out of the possible score of 5. An interesting observation we saw was the location of fusion restaurants. If we examine the location information from a critical mass approach, Bloemback is the pinnacle to the identity of Koreatown. Having said that, the clusters of restaurants are also located just outside of the financial district of Toronto. Lastly, 13 of the 50 restaurants were coded to be fusion of the Korean category. Interestingly, despite the differences in products served, fusion restaurants remain closely located around the mainstream Korean restaurants. Approaching this analysis with hoteling law is a perfect fit. 41 of the 50 restaurants were found to contain our staple dish. The other 9 did not serve the dishes because they either served dessert or our bars. Subsequently, when all these price points were equally distributed, an average rating of 4, and a relatively few fusion restaurants, we start to observe an emerging pattern of a highly competitive market that serves very similar dishes. Our data is a good indicator of how Korean restaurants are competing sustainably with limited dishes, since only 0.3 of the population are Korean.
Looking at price point analysis, we have seen a very even dispersion of data, with 15 restaurants located at the upper price bracket, 15 at the lower price bracket, and 12 at the middle. 8 restaurants, however, did not serve our bibimbap, which was our cultural staple dish. 3 of these restaurants were also fusion restaurants and were rated 4.5, which suggests that the absence of the staple dish does not have an impact on rating. Looking at the upper price point, the most represented region was North York. Our data shows that the Yonge and Steeles intersection is where these restaurants are primarily located. Applying critical mass theorem, it can be argued that the proven success of high price points in this area allow for other restaurants to maintain a high price. The rating at this price point is relatively volatile, ranging from 3.5 to 4.5, with the presence of 3 3.5 rated restaurants. The primary cluster on Yonge and Steeles has a median rating of 4.5, suggesting that these clustered restaurants are similar in quality according to Yelp ratings. The cluster also includes both fusion and non-fusion restaurants, suggesting a willingness to compete for customers. Looking at the middle price point, the City of Toronto region is the most represented, with North York not being represented at all. 6 of the 12 restaurants can be classified as fusion. Ratings-wise, there are 5 restaurants rated at 3.5, which is the most within our sample. The central cluster in this region is on Bloor and Christie in Toronto. We see that the restaurants within also include fusion restaurants. Moreover, due to them offering the same price point, per hotelling's law, they will move closer to each other within space to attract the most customers. Observing the lowest price point, we can see that Toronto is yet again the most represented and clustered around the Bloor and Christie area. Ratings in this cluster are all very close, with a multitude of 4s. This suggests that price does not have a strong correlation with ratings for Korean restaurants. Moreover, on this main cluster of 5 restaurants, none of the restaurants are classified as fusion. This strongly supports the idea that due to a lack of differentiation within the menu, Korean restaurants are around one another, particularly at this price point cluster.
So for Indian restaurants, the categories we have examined for comparisons remains the same as Korean restaurants, which are fusion, region, and ratings, as it provides the most significant results in relation to hotelling's law and critical mass. A general spatial observation of the maps indicate that the top 50 restaurants are relatively more dispersed than Korean restaurants, with restaurants primarily clustered around the City of Toronto, a good amount of representation in Mississauga and Scarborough region, and relatively far less representation in Markham, Etobicoke, and North York, which are likely to be located as individual branches rather than clusters. This level of scattering suggests that Indian restaurants are willing to be more scattered because they do not feel the need to compete with other Indian restaurants. The dish we have selected for our coding analysis is biryani. Interestingly enough, 11 out of 50 restaurants did not serve this dish, regardless of the fact that it is commonly found to be a staple dish within the Indian cuisine discourse. This suggests that Indian restaurants are confident with their audience enough to differentiate and deviate from traditional menu items and still be sustainable and viable without having the need to compete. Most restaurants simply label themselves as Indian as per their websites. However, in terms of our examination of restaurants which serve fusion, 20% of the restaurants have found it pertinent that they define themselves as more simply than Indian. These are the restaurants we have coded under fusion. The ratings of these fusion restaurants remain consistent with the sample average rating of 4. In fact, 4 of the 11 fusion restaurants are rated 4.5 or above. The whole sample includes 12 restaurants with a rating of 4.5 or above, suggesting that fusion restaurants make up 25% of the highest rated Indian restaurants. Another significant finding of our analysis is alcohol service within the clustered restaurants in Toronto region, which further proved to support our application of hotelling's law in that 14 out of 31 restaurants in the Toronto region of our spatial map served alcohol, which is almost 50%. This suggests that the reason these restaurants don't feel the need to cluster is because they are differentiated by the fact that some serve alcohol and some don't. As they do not need to compete for customers as intensely if they all served alcohol or they all didn't. They can be more liberal in their spatial positioning. This is also interesting to know as a contrast with alcohol service with Korean restaurants.
Through cultural discourse, when we determine our staple dish to be biryani, we use three price brackets to differentiate how restaurants value the staple dishes and how it relates to location and ratings. Data on price point reveals that most Indian restaurants fall in the middle price bracket, with 13 in the lower price bracket and only 8 in the upper price bracket. Looking at the price points, it can be observed that all the highest price points restaurants are located in two major regions, Toronto and Mississauga. This also suggests that higher priced restaurants are successful in an area that is mostly populated with low to mid priced restaurants. The above findings suggests an element of critical mass theory because these higher priced restaurants are differentiating themselves from their lower to mid priced competitors based on price.
Looking at our coding analysis has yielded sufficient results to support our hypotheses. Korean restaurants do in fact cluster on one another due to their similarity in menu and services offered. Even though fusion restaurants do not need to compete as intensely due to their uniqueness, they still locate themselves within the same clusters, suggesting critical mass theory, which posits that restaurants are more likely to be located in areas where success has already been proven. We identified that Indian restaurants do not feel the same necessity to cluster, as they differentiate themselves through other means. 11 out of our sample of 50 Indian restaurants did not serve biryani, suggesting that they did not feel the necessity to include a widely acknowledged cultural dish as part of their menu. Whilst more Korean restaurants were classified as fusion, they still clustered with non-fusion restaurants to likely attract both customer bases. In contrast, Indian fusion restaurants are primarily represented in the Scarborough area rather than the two major areas, and 7 of these 11 restaurants do not serve biryani. This may suggest that the restaurants in the lower represented regions feel a need to differentiate what they offer, as these areas do not have a proven restaurant success. As the presence of Indian restaurants is low, success is not guaranteed, suggesting a connection to the critical mass hypothesis, which argues that restaurants will be present in areas where restaurant success has already been proven. Similarly, Indian restaurants have less convention regarding alcohol service and delivery, showing a relatively even distribution across both, suggesting that these restaurants do not feel the need to adhere to convention to compete with one another. In contrast, we see that alcohol service and abstaining from delivery is common among the top 50 Korean restaurants. This ultimately supports our overall claim that Korean restaurants cluster around one another due to a need to compete based on convention. Even fusion restaurants cluster with non-fusion restaurants in order to attract a wider audience, as seen in the case of Korean restaurants. In terms of ratings, we observed that for Korean restaurants there isn't a clear correlation between price and rating. For Indian restaurants, there was a clear relationship between price and rating, with the upper price point being more consistently at 4, whereas the lower ranging from 3.5 to 4. This correlation could suggest that Indian restaurants are aware of how they are perceived and locate themselves regardless of proximity to higher rated restaurants or more expensive ones. This is also made evident with 7 of the 8 higher priced restaurants located in the central region of Toronto, suggesting that these restaurants do not feel a need to compete in price. Even in the most represented region, this can be observed generally as the spatial distribution of Indian restaurants does not show any clear clusters. Thus, comparing our two data sets, we can use the conclusion observed for Korean restaurants to understand Indian restaurants. Indian restaurants do not compete based on convention. Less competition in general makes the need for less requirement to cluster. We have seen that clusters are areas of proven success, according to Patterson and Silver's critical mass. No clear clusters exist within Indian restaurants, but focused in one major region. This could suggest that this major region is seen as the area of success. Furthermore, fusion restaurants located in the lower represented regions and not in any clear clusters for Indian restaurants suggest a need to be unique, as the traditional restaurant success is not proven in this lower represented area. Korean fusion restaurants continue to cluster among the non-fusion restaurants, suggesting a need to compete for customers, as well as a trend for fusion restaurants to be located in areas of proven success where traditional restaurants are already present. Thank you for watching our presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. For more information, you can check out Creative Cities and our other blog posts. Thank you.